Hello and welcome to our new series, USSO Goes to Europe, as we discuss American studies on the continent. Hello and welcome to our very first episode in our new sub-series, European Initiatives in American Studies. At USSO, we've long been interested in hearing about the very best research and events happening at institutions across Europe. After publishing work in American studies from scholars across the continent, we now wanted to give something back, to highlight some of the very best initiatives happening on this side of the Atlantic. After all, researching, working and conferencing in Europe is more climate change friendly, often far cheaper, and for many of us, far more accessible. For today's episode, we travel to Middelburg in the Netherlands, the capital of Zeeland province, a centre for lens crafting during the Dutch Golden Age. Middelburg is 160 miles and a roughly 5-hour hop on the Eurostar from London. There, in 1986, the Roosevelt Study Centre for American Studies opened in the Abbey of Middelburg. It was, noted President Ronald Reagan, quote, not only a living tribute to free great Americans, but also a significant part of the bond that connects European and American democracies. Since then, the institution has grown into a graduate school, library, research and conference centre for the study of US history and transatlantic relations in the modern era, launching a new partnership with the University of Leiden in 2016 and moving to a new location at the Zeeland Archives in 2020. Amid such changes, we've also seen a change in name to the Roosevelt Institute for American Studies, or RIAS. Today we'll be discussing RIAS's biannual PhD seminar, a centrepiece of its mission established in 2003. For this, I'm delighted to be joined today by Aija Oksman, a PhD candidate at the University of Edinburgh and USSO's very own book editor. Aija had attended RIAS in March 2022 to conduct further research for her own thesis, and I'm told made some truly important discoveries while there. As someone with extensive experience of working and researching for American studies in Europe, what are your hopes for this new series of ours?
Thank you, Tom. And yes, I didn't actually attend the seminar itself. I did a 2-week research trip specifically to use the archives and materials related to my own research at RIAS in Middelburg, and it was a fantastic experience. After a big chunk of my research time had actually been during the pandemic, and I felt a bit at loss as to have a proper research experience, which perhaps also fed to my own imposter syndrome for a very long time. I had to cancel a trip to the US, for example, and everything kind of seemed halted for a while. And having been able to get to RIAS, and may I add, the trip was also made possible due to a generous fund I got from the European Association for American Studies. They have an intra-European as well as transatlantic grants, and I got the intra-European grant to attend RIAS. When I got to RIAS, I felt like a proper researcher, and it is amazing how such a wealth of archival research material is available so close to me. And as to your question, Tom, regarding the hopes for this series, I hope that we get to highlight these opportunities that are, for many of us, almost right at our doorstep. Many of us have responsibilities and ties beyond our academic endeavors that make transatlantic travel impossible at the very least very difficult to arrange. And also many grants for overseas travels are very competitive, and not nearly often enough would any given one grant alone cover the whole cost of such a trip. Not only would we want to promote the amazing opportunities such as RIAS's PhD seminar for our postgraduate audiences and other researchers, early career research, but their overall archival riches at RIAS as well. And we hope to eventually get to interview organizations and institutions who offer similar opportunities as well. But this talk is not really about me or Tom, so I would like to introduce our today's featuring visitors. Gaetano di Tommaso is a postdoctoral researcher at RIAS, where he helps to coordinate the PhD seminar. He completed his PhD in a double program at the University of Bologna and Sciences Po Paris, and researches the pursuit of natural resource. Extraction influenced life and politics in US history. Heleen Blommers is a PhD candidate in social and economic history in Vrije Universiteit, Amsterdam, and her PhD project is entitled Deconstructing the War on Poverty, the Rise of a Policy Failure Narrative. She investigates contemporary and retrospective criticisms of the war on poverty and presented this research at the RIAS PhD seminar in the fall of 2022. David Carlson is also a PhD student working at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana. He is a historian of slavery and the Atlantic during the late colonial and early United States, and his PhD project investigates the transitions from the transatlantic to the transcontinental slave trade. He also presented research at the RIAS seminar in the fall of 2022. Welcome all, and we're delighted to have you join us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aija. I know there's a lot to read, so thank you. To start off, could you tell us briefly about what RIAS is and why it was established? What makes it such a great place to pursue and research American studies in Europe? And how does the PhD seminar build upon the Institute's broader goals and the broader facilities I talked about, including the amazing archival resources there?
So first of all, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Aija, for setting this up and giving me the opportunity to talk about what is probably one of the most successful programs that we run and one of the best known that we have here in Middelburg. I'm happy to talk about the story of the RIAS. I don't know how much time we have, but I'll be quick. The whole idea of having an Institute for American Studies here goes back to the early 80s, as a matter of fact. Everything started in 1982, which still is a special year for American and Dutch relations. 100th anniversary of the establishment of formal diplomatic relations between the US and the Netherlands. The Netherlands happened to be the second country who recognized the US. It was also the centenary of Franklin Roosevelt's birth. It was also a very difficult time in general for transatlantic relations after the Euro missile crisis, with the threat of deployment of American missiles, NATO missiles on European territory, which caused a wave of protests, popular protests in Europe. So out of that troubled period emerged the idea to establish a center here to foster the common understanding between the two sides and strengthen the relationship. This idea went through a series of course milestones. One of them was the inauguration of a special prize for Freedom Awards that was launched in that year, sort of as a minor Nobel Prize that throughout the years has been assigned to several prominent activists, politicians, and also freedom fighters in a way for civil rights, as for example, Václav Havel, or Nelson Mandela in the early 2000s. It's assigned every other year here in the Netherlands. That's also a tradition that started in the early 80s. And then in 86, we have the foundation, the establishment of the center here. The reason why it's here in Middelburg, it's because originally the Roosevelt family migrated to the US from this very part of the Netherlands, the southwest corner of the Netherlands. The island is called Holland, which is where they moved from to reach the shores of the US, particularly in New York, but it's today New York. And so the center developed through first a small partnership with a few selected universities in Europe. One of them in the UK was Cambridge, but also in France with Sorbonne. And also in Germany with Heidelberg, in addition to Leiden. And then throughout the years, it developed to what it is today, which is really a pulsating center for American studies, not only in the Netherlands, but in entire Europe. Recently, about 7 years ago, between 2016 and 17, what used to be called, as you mentioned, the Roosevelt Study Center, became the Roosevelt Institute for American Studies through a new partnership with Leiden University. And again, throughout the history, and even more so in the last few years, the Institute has, let's say, pursued its mission to become, well, of course, we are an archive, first of all, but we're also a graduate school, providing some sort of a base point of reference for those studying the US and American studies programs within the country and in the rest of Europe. We provide training per students. We hold, of course, PhD seminars. We have our own PhD students working here in Middelburg. And of course, we do, again, provide a series of educational opportunities throughout the country. That has to do with, of course, again, research seminar, teaching expertise, student support of the master and BA level. And the PhD seminar, it's a crucial part in all this because it not only gives the opportunity to, well, of course, invite and get in contact with all sorts of researchers studying and working on American history and American culture and American politics in Europe and in the US. So there is this role of connecting peers and researchers, but also to, let's say, give the possibility to our own scholars, researchers, to experience, to go through this training, which is basically the essence of our PhD program. So being together for a few days just to discuss in depth your own project. Why is that special? Well, it's because, I mean, usually, and I'm sure that David and Heleen can talk more about this, when you're doing a PhD, you have to fight for time to get the attention of your supervisor because of course, in most cases, those are very busy people and professors that have dozens of other activities and commitments. And so it's difficult sometimes to get a thorough feedback. We bring people here in a very informal setting, which helps a lot, but combines also, again, this informal atmosphere with a rigorous, thorough examination, feedback on your work. The way in which it works is, again, we usually start on a Friday evening, on a Wednesday evening with a nice dinner, with a nice get-together, and then we go through 2 days of discussion between 6 and 9 PhD students. Together with 3 or 4 senior researchers, professors, of course, selected on the basis of the proposals that we got, together with the staff at the RIAS, so other PhD students, other researchers, and we basically the format is that the student presents for 10-15 minutes, and then we dedicate up to 45 minutes to the discussion on of their program, of their research. So it's a very detailed, let's say, discussion, and it's also helpful in the conversation. It's very horizontal. I mean, we are among peers. PhD students are asked to give their own input, to try to, again, assess strengths and weaknesses in each other's work. And it's it's the event that we are all looking forward throughout the years. We do this twice every year. It started as an annual event. Actually, it was once every 2 years, and then soon after it became an annual event. And then in the last 5-6 years, it's been held twice every year. We always get a lot of application, and it's great to be able to connect, again, people from the US, Southern Europe, again, the Netherlands, but also from other countries like China, and Russia too. It's beautiful. So that's how the PhD seminar builds on this mission of education that we have, and outreach to give the possibility to engage with as many resources and researchers as possible here in the Netherlands. And of course, that's also an opportunity for some of our guests, as Aija might know, to spend a little bit more time here and to do archival research. Every researcher that comes here, they come following a specific research thread, and then they discover how much we have. Each one of the people that I met in the last couple of years left commenting on how more extensive than expected were our researchers. Sorry that I'm bragging a little bit, but it's actually true. We have thousands of records combining, for example, presidential libraries and archives in the US, with other collections that focus on more limited topics in US history. But the beauty of it and the strength of our research institute is that you don't need to travel to the US and to cover like 20 states to find those documents. You can find all of them here in one single location in Middelburg. And I'll be happy to talk more about the archive later on if necessary. I'll stop here. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Gaetano. The archive is immense, and I absolutely loved working on the microfilms filming, and you have to manually turn the machine, so you really feel like you're doing physical kind of research, which nowadays everything is so online and so on. So it kind of, you really get your hands into it. So it was a fantastic experience. And I did find things that, for example, my research includes the FBI. FBI had told me that records don't exist on a person. And while I was at RIAS, I actually find out a record does exist on a person, and I was able to follow that thread. So that was like a huge discovery for me, for my research at the time. So it was fantastic. But I would like to ask a question more for David and Heleen, being the students, that how did you find out about the seminar? How did you sign up? How did you get funding for it as well, which is probably something a lot of postgraduates would consider as well, because I know RIAS has their own fundings as well for various research opportunities.
So how did I find out about it? I'm from the Netherlands, and I worked, I think about 10 years ago, I worked there as an intern when I was a student at the RIAS. And now one of my supervisors is the director of the RIAS. So it's quite close connected, but I also think it tells how established the RIAS is for American studies, I think, in the Netherlands. So I attended a few seminars before without participating, but just listening to each other's or to other presentations and asking questions. And then I really noticed how helpful it is when you're working on a paper or a chapter or whatever, and to really get those comments from your peers, from scholars in the Netherlands who are invited to come as well. So that was really one of the reasons why I signed up, because I knew like I will get the paper done, but I also know that I really get something out of it and really have useful comments and new insights. And it's just a very, I think, like Gaetano said, it's very informal. It's fun to meet other people, especially from Europe. So it's a nice opportunity to get together. So, but I mean, it also kind of goes to your questions about funding. Since I am from the Netherlands, it is for me quite a cheap train ride to Middelburg. So that's really easy. But I know that maybe even the European American Studies Association also has funding. The RIAS has funding. So there are quite a few, I think, resources you can use.
Lou, thank you for having me. Yeah, my answer is sort of convoluted. I heard about it because I had done another PhD workshop that summer where I met Aija and some other delightful people. And one of the delightful people that I met works on a topic that's kind of similar to mine. And he found out about the RIAS seminar because one of the students there had found a talk that he'd given on YouTube about his research, and she told him that he should sign up and come. And so he applied, and then he told me that I should apply. And so I did. So I went kind of because he thought it would be a good idea. I thought it'd be nice to see him again. He works on a similar topic, and learn kind of through him, and then researching the Institute that there were a lot of people there like Damien Pargas, and some students who were working on research that kind of overlapped with mine. So that was how I heard about it. I was able to go. It's a little bit, my circumstances are a little bit unfair. The reason that I was able to go is because I just happened to be in London for that fall. And so despite being an American who lives in the United States, which is far away from the Netherlands, for me, it was just a little train ride, on the Eurostar to hop over. So that was kind of what made it feasible for me to go. So, yeah. And yeah, again, I think, as I said, I wanted to go because there were people there who researched things that overlapped with my research. And I'm always ready to, put myself up in front of a group and be, of use for my research. So whatever opportunity I can find for something like that, I'm game.
And thank you, David, for joining, because there was that edition was actually extremely fun and entertaining as many others. But it was very nice to have both of you there. So a little bit more about the funding opportunities and how it works. Well, once you get accepted, once you are invited to come here, the moment you step foot in Middelburg, everything else is taken care of, because we cover for the accommodation of our guests and also the meals throughout the 3 days of the PhD seminar. So that's the only, let's say it's not only, but the part that falls on the students is the travel, are the travel expenses. even in that case, there are some way to get funding because we offer, well, of course, we offer internships that are paid as the one that Heleen mentioned, but we also offer travel grants as the one that Aija got, which sometimes got combined with the presence at the PhD seminar. So PhD students can apply for research grants to travel here to spend, usually around a week working in our archives. I think it depends on the various research grants, but it could be up to 600 euros. And then, of course, if you are in Europe, it's much easier because it would help you to cover most of your travel expenses and to stay here in Middelburg for a few days. And so technically you can combine those two things, which should allow you to be here for the PhD seminar and do a little bit of research while here. So yes, but we do offer, please, in addition to the PhD seminar, take a look also at our travel grants and research grants that basically we are assigning them on a rolling basis. So there is no specific deadline that you have to stick to.
Great, thank you all of you for that information. It's really the level of intellectual scrutiny which anyone presenting a RIAS would receive from talented international peers that really stands out in those answers and makes this opportunity so valuable. Nonetheless, there's obviously a flip side of that coin, which is that intellectually intensive can sometimes mean intimidating, particularly in a city far from home. Do any of you, having been through the RIAS experience, have any advice to people to make the most of this kind of intellectual experience?
What I really noticed is it's quite intense and there are quite a lot of disciplines and a lot of different angles and topics. So what I really found is I identify more as a historian, but this is really a kind of a seminar where you really have people who know a lot about American culture, literature, history, like name it, and it's there. So what I really found helpful was just write your paper, write down what you're struggling with, what your questions are, and feel free to share it when you're there. And then you really notice that people have their ideas and have their different angles of tackling the specific thing you're working on. And also feel free if there's a presentation or a paper that is completely out of your area of expertise. I've noticed during the seminar that all the questions always help people and give yourself kind of new ideas of what you're working on, even if it's a completely different time period or field or whatever. So just write down what you're struggling with, go there, feel a little bit relaxed and do your thing. But don't take it too heavily and just be with peers and discuss your work. That would be my main kind of thing that really makes it useful. Yeah, I don't know how David thinks about that. I see you a little bit nodding.
Yeah, I think the main thing about that kind of experience, I think, is really that you get out what you put in. And so as far as it being, something where you're far away from home or something like that, I mean, the more kind of you can prepare ahead of time to know kind of what you're doing going in is good. I think as a presenter, somebody who is sharing your research, with strangers, I think it's good to be mindful of the non-specialists in the audience. And again, so if you go in, I think with a sense of what you want to get out of it, maybe you have a firm idea of the kinds of questions you have for your audience, or you have a good idea of the kind of information that you want to present to them, or the kind of conversation. I mean, I think that you as the presenter actually have quite a bit of control over that. And so yeah, you get out what you put in. And again, as far as it being far away from home goes, I think, or a strange city or whatever, I've done enough of these at this point that I've actually found that, whatever kind of the, whether it's in the Netherlands or the UK or in Germany or here in the United States, I mean, I don't know if this is just, because of the academic class or something like that, but people tend to be pretty much on the same page. People so far I have found are quite friendly and quite eager to kind of engage in conversation. Everybody is kind of coming at it with a similar list of, similar experiences, similar level of suffering in the archives and so on. So there is actually, I found, a pretty good sense of community right out of the gate. And everybody at RIAS is, the hospitality, very, very warm and welcoming. So it was very, very positive in that regard.
Can I add a couple of things, just because it's true what Heleen and David were saying. I mean, it's sort of a boot camp, but a fun one, because we keep everyone together. We keep the whole group together for a couple of days, more than that, 3 days, basically, over 2 days and a half. And we stick together. We have dinners together, we have lunches together. And that's also a moment in which the conversation continues, also when talking about and discussing your own research. So it's not only, we ask all speakers to pre-circulate their papers, so we come there with a pretty defined idea of what you're working on. But the dynamics and how those very different projects interact with each other once you're there, it's actually the added value to the experience, because the PhD seminar, it's open to all kind of researchers focusing on projects focusing on American studies in general. So not only American history per se, but also, again, cultural aspects, media will be discussed. And the way, I mean, by the end of the 2 days, you see how researchers found their own connections, way to discuss additional elements. It's very beautiful, and it's also a very strong, deep and important learning experience also for us who are there, and we get a sense of what kind of cutting edge work is being done on the US as a whole, in American studies, in Europe, in the Netherlands, and elsewhere. So that's also part of the process of those 3 days here in Middelburg.
I remember what I wanted to say after hearing you say all of that. As a listener, as a participant in the thing, it's really important, I think, in kind of an interdisciplinary environment. Like for me, I think of myself as an historian. I don't really think of myself generally, although this is maybe changing a little bit now. I don't really think of myself as somebody who does American studies broadly, but going to American studies, because it's kind of an interdisciplinary environment, listening to presentations from people who are like coming at it from all kinds of, I think it's very important in a sense to trust yourself enough to ask questions. And I found a lot of the most interesting feedback that I've gotten, and a lot of the most interesting recommendations that I've gotten, have been from people who are not historians and who just are not, they don't think of themselves as, et cetera, et cetera. People who do literature or gender studies or things like this often have really interesting angles. And so I think, when you're going in, this gets back to, getting out what you put in. I think you have to trust yourself as a scholar to be able to contribute to things that are outside of your immediate area of expertise. And the more people are kind of willing to do that, kind of respectfully, I think it really enriches the conversation.
Absolutely. And especially because we're all still students, it is practice for our own vivat, our own defense, to be able to articulate our own research, kind of defend our own research where needed, and then take on the feedback from others. So it is excellent, like Gaetano was saying as well. It's just great practice. It's beautiful practice for our overall experience. Very insightful to hear, because I didn't attend a seminar myself, but I've been at RIAS and I've been to similar, like David mentioned, we met at a similar type of a research seminar accelerator program thing. So it is a useful skill to have, and is a great opportunity to have. So, and for David especially, coming from America and being in Europe, and then Heleen meeting all of these people from around the world, how has meeting such a diverse and international group of researchers changed your approach to outreach and careers in American studies, or has it at all? And same for Gaetano as well, meeting this cutting edge new research, like you mentioned.
If I think about it, I think also what we really said about the other questions, how much expertise you find at these seminars. So it really makes you realize how many people are actually working on American studies in Europe, because I think, especially in the Netherlands, it can feel quite lonely, and you're feeling like you're the only PhD or the only one with 3 or 4 others working on American studies. And then you realize how many people are working on it, how kind of big their expertise is, what kind of a wealth of resources we have here. So, and how close everything is. So it's really easier to reach out, to connect, and to think about further research. So that really kind of makes you realize, again, there's more here in Europe than if you're working on the US than you usually think from your own desk at your university. So that kind of changed it again for me. And I knew it, but it forces it again to see it again, the seminar, I think.
First, I feel silly saying this now, but the first couple of times that I met like people who were in the UK or something like that, and I heard that they studied or that they did American studies specifically, I remember just thinking, why? And, and I mean, I should know better. And I think maybe I do now. But I think for me, being an American and having grown up in the United States, I was actually quite surprised to find out that there were so many people who did American studies in Europe. And this has been something that's continued to be sort of strange for me as I've met and talked to them. And it really shouldn't be surprising to me, I suppose. But one does get a sense, I think, and it's possible to know when you're within the United States, but it's such a physically large place. And the United States is such a kind of cultural juggernaut, for better or for worse, that you sort of know that it goes out and it goes out of the United States. But I don't think that you really get a sense of the scale at which that happens until you yourself leave the United States. The craziest thing that I think I saw when I was overseas this past fall was I was in Belgium, and there was a medieval church, and it had been turned into a McDonald's. And I remember looking at that and thinking, like, oh my God, this is like the American flag planted in the moon. Like, it's just everywhere. And it's just everywhere. And so I think, and I met at RIAS, I met several Americans who were academics and who had gotten positions in the Netherlands because of their expertise in the United States and their cultural savvy, et cetera, et cetera. And as a historian of British colonial North America, and I mean, even thinking about it in the context of the broader Atlantic, I mean, Europe and the United States, Europe and the Americas more broadly, are very deeply intertwined, for better and for worse. And as I think that has kind of become clear since last February, I guess it was 2 Februaries ago now, with the new land war, et cetera, we really are kind of intertwined with one another, whether we like it or not, for better and for worse, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, meeting the diverse and international group of researchers has kind of made me a little bit more introspective in a way about the degree to which we're all kind of, what's the best word to use? I'm torn between saying the degree to which we're all interconnected and the degree to which we are stuck with each other. Or perhaps I should say the degree to which you are stuck with us.
I just want to build on this to say something, which is, I guess it's a great definition of American studies in Europe, to the degree to which we are stuck with the US, but also the continuous transformation of the field of study. So Anja asked about what do we get out of this experience, and it's not only about learning about new research being done, but it's also a prism through which we can assess the transformation of the way in which we study the US. What are the most important themes? How do we look at the US, American studies in Europe? It's an incredibly fascinating field of study, approach, attempt to look into and understand the US, its past, its present, and possibly its future. And through those meetings, we get to talk to the people doing this kind of research. It's not only about learning, specific, archival work being done, but also what is driving our attempt to understand what are the most important issues, the most pressing one that we want to discuss, what is most relevant even for today's conversation. And so that's a dual, again, multifold value that we have when we sit down in those seminars. Apart from learning, again, about new experience and making new connections, it's also about reflecting on the way in which we are doing our work and looking at the US from Europe.
If I might add one other little thing, I think also because we're studying in the US or we're studying the US or American studies or whatever it is in your field, you're usually kind of want to have a conversation with scholars, and you usually turn to the US to talk with American scholars. But I also think we're working in the humanities. So I think the questions we ask and the way in which we think about those questions really matter for what kind of research we're doing. And what I've also really noticed, and the RIAS is one of the places where I've noticed it as well, is you have a completely different conversation about your research in a European setting and in an American setting. And that really also helps you to kind of see that contrast and think about, how do I work with this in my research? And how do I kind of think about myself as a European researcher? And how do I kind of position myself within the American field of work? So that's also, I think, something that really comes out of this getting together in a European setting at the RIAS.
Great, thank you, all of you. There's lots of interesting thoughts there about the internationality of American studies. I'm struck particularly by both David's point that European studying American studies surprised you, and Heleen, that feeling perhaps others within your institution weren't maybe studying this field, or there weren't many of you studying it. To concretise some of those points, particularly as we embark upon this new series, what are the biggest challenges people face studying American studies in Europe? Is it funding, transportation, language, and what tangible steps do you think will be taken by individuals and institutions to make this a more international, pan-European field so we can have more events like RIAS?
What I would think about is, you're doing this as a series, right? So you're interviewing more people from other events. So from my perspective, what I would do is really find out what is nearby and connect to those kind of hubs of expertise and events that are happening. And I think this initiative is also very nice because it really gets the European field of American studies more known with these events in Europe. And it's a challenge, but on the other hand, it's also because we're in Europe, and in a way, Europe is much smaller than the US. Everyone is nearby. And it's you can take the train and you're in Germany or in the UK or in France or wherever. So also just make use of it, whatever is there, and try to connect with everything that is available. That would be my main way of going about it myself. Yeah.
So, talking about challenges, the lack of, the limited resources, it's probably the most important aspect here, which is not in terms, when we think about funding, we are not talking about the limited possibility to travel and engage with other peers or colleagues, but also, for example, to do research per se. We study US history, US politics, US society. And being able to access sources, it's a big deal, clearly, and many students across Europe don't have that possibility. And as we started this conversation today talking about sustainability, that's also a moral, an ethical challenge these days. And that's clearly, that's the main challenge today. So access to primary sources, limited funding, in a way also, this brings also something else, which is, again, limited visibility to your research. Of course, if you're unable to travel, to speak with other people in the US, for example, or join conferences especially for young researchers, PhD students at the early stages, that's crucial, and that's a problem. Okay, that's a practical problem that turns into a professional one in a way, and those are all very visible barriers to research that we have. Another one, when talking about American studies in general, is the fact that the idea to have a pan-European approach to American studies then has to deal with the fact that in reality, this field is fractured into national subfields because there are language, cultural barriers, the way in which different academic systems, different programs that have their own story and their own ideas about how to pursue this kind of research, and not always it's possible to, it's not that easy, it's not that immediate to collaborate or find ourselves on the same page. And that's why it's important. I think that's why it becomes crucial to find these hubs, as for example, the RIAS, or possibility to engage with other people in a way that allows students to overcome those barriers, practical barriers. As for example, gaining access to primary sources or databases. One thing that it could be extremely helpful, in theory, I can imagine is, establishing, for example, shared digital platforms or archives or libraries, or sharing access between universities to very expensive database of secondary sources, articles that different universities have. But again, that's not possible for each university. That's not possible for every countries in Europe, and that's a problem when we talk about possibly a pan-European approach to American studies. Those are serious, again, difficulties once again. Even like the diversity, the differences in the way in which we develop our own curricula. In a way, that's, let's say, the beauty and the opportunity that lies in American studies, because it's a field that thrives on transnational and interdisciplinarity, transnationalism, transnational approaches, and interdisciplinary. So I think that's something that would need to be fostered if we want to continue to pursue, to explore the U.S. history, U.S. politics, U.S. society, this field, but that comes at a cost, practical also, that we need to ideally try to overcome. And that's probably the most important thing today, apart from, again, possibly continuing also in that speaks to the evolution, the trajectory of American studies in Europe as a whole that started after the Cold War with a very specific, let's say, aim or goal, also to promote the specific American values. And now what's probably very important at this stage is also to reckon and confront and face and try to understand the paradoxes of American democracy. And so being let's say, a fair critic of what's on the other side of the ocean. So multiplying these critical perspectives on American history and American society. Again, I repeat myself, in American politics is crucial, especially here in Europe, to be able to engage properly and maybe just to avoid to replicate a narrative of American exceptionalism that we might want to make a little bit more complex and try to again, revise in a way that is meaningful in light of today's challenges to our society, globally speaking. When we think about, issues of race and diversity, something that we need to address, or even, again, sustainability. So a critical eye in Europe is could be surely beneficial to develop those critical approaches. And that's something that can unite, in a way, European, even though in their differences, European programs and European American studies, hopefully with the possibility to, again, overcome practical barriers to access to primary sources and networking.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And thank you, everyone. We're coming near the end. I think we've taken a lot of your time, especially Tom and David, so early in the morning. However, I wanted to thank you all from my side. Tom will give a bit more of a closing spiel for all of us. But my last question in general would be, what's next for RIAS? What's in the planning? What's beyond and together with the PhD seminar?
First of all, this year would be the 20th anniversary of our first PhD seminar. So there is one coming up in June 2023, and then the second one of this year will be held in December. So please keep an eye on the call for paper and apply. We're waiting to welcome you here. And then the RIAS is always evolving. Okay, so we have we are working already. We usually have. Traditionally, we have conferences, policy workshops, seminars, lectures every year. So we're already working on the agenda for this fall. We have already started a few of the items on the list for this year, and we'll continue, of course, throughout the year. But more generally speaking, in the last few years, we have been pursuing a research agenda that looked at the legacy of the Roosevelts. So Theodore Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Franklin Roosevelt, and how, again, their impact on American society, again, transformed the way in which we look at the U.S., but the way in which we, again, study the U.S., the way we look at, for example, the relationship between state and society, or what kind of role they had. There are two main research agendas developing these days at the RIAS. One deals with racial democracy, the idea of racial democracy, which means studying, exploring challenges and paradoxes that we see in how they developed, how they manifested in American history. Of course, dealing with civil rights, going back to slavery, to civil rights today. And then more recently, we are investing a lot of resources, which include also expanding our archival collection to incorporate elements of environmental history. So we are, again, that's the newest, let's say, research path, with the idea of expanding our studies of the US to include also, of course, the environment and the global impact of the US at the environmental level. The newest research agenda is somehow related to, again, the role of water, the importance of water as a natural element due to, of course, our location. We are in the Netherlands. We are in Zeeland, a country that is vitally, inextricably connected with water. And so one of the, again, as I said, the research paths that we are developing, that we are embracing, is to try to look at our past through the lens of natural elements, in this case, water. So to move our perspective from a land-based one to a water-based one. Try to see how we engage with natural resources, how they impacted our lives, how we developed patterns of resistance and adaptation when we're looking at our relationship with, for example, natural elements like water. So always evolving, always trying to follow and anticipate those, let's say, newest cutting edge overview and exploration of American history. And we welcome you and to tell us something more about this. So please join us, come to visit us, and let's start a conversation together about these issues and more. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gaetano. Thank you for all of you for talking about your experiences today. That Eurostar ticket now looks all the more appealing because it sounds like there's a lot going on at RIAS during its 20th anniversary. So thank you, all of you, for launching this new series. We know in an era after the political events affecting the British-European relationship in recent years, as US politics looks all the more dicey, particularly for groups historically underrepresented within our profession, and the climate crisis shows no signs of stopping, these connections are going to be all the more important going forward. I think we talk a lot in academia about positionality, and a vital aspect of that might be knowing just what's going on next door. So let's keep up with these connections. USSO would love to collaborate with anyone working in this field, including RIAS. Being in 4 time zones today, really enacting this international approach, we have various breakfasts and lunches to get to. So thank you, all of you, for your time. Best of luck, Gaetano, with the 20th anniversary, and David, Heleen, for all your research going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.